Greetings all, Ferrari Man 601 here. Welcome back to another Formula One launch analysis. This time we have the Ferrari SF1000, unveiled today by Scuderia Ferrari in what was a very bizarre and completely inappropriate event for the unveiling of a race car, I must say. They were in some theater in some place, and yes, it was about a 30-minute musical/dance routine, and then they unveiled the car. And of course, all of the typical pomp and circumstance that you'd associate with a Formula One car review and reveal then occurred. Yeah, Ferrari, just don't do that anymore. You could have saved probably a few €100,000 just by showing us the car, and that being it. But I digress. Anyway, what have Ferrari done here with their 2020 Challenger, the SF1000, which was the name that had been rumored to be used this year, and now we have confirmed it. Yes, they are calling it the SF1000, and that, of course, is an allusion to Ferrari entering their 1000th Formula One Grand Prix event at some point in 2020. I'm not entirely sure which race that exactly will be, but it's going to happen this year, hence the car bears that name. What have we got here in front of us? Well, we have got ourselves the first look at what is probably, big air quotes there, probably going to be a frontrunner in 2020. Ferrari, the first of the front-running teams to unveil their car. Of course, this week we are awaiting some of the other teams, most notably Mercedes. We are waiting for that on Valentine's Day, the 14th of February. However, what have the guys from Maranello come up with for 2020? First of all, the first thing that you'll probably notice on this car is that it doesn't look all that much tremendously different from its immediate predecessor, the SF90 from 2019. This is something that we talked about in the review of the Haas launch pictures that we got last week, and I think this is definitely going to be holding true for the majority of the grid. 2020 being an evolutionary rather than a revolutionary year, and really I don't think that the teams would be too justified in dumping a whole lot of investment, either time, money-wise, or both, into their 2020 designs, mostly because everything at the end of this season is completely gone. We're going to be throwing away everything for 2021, where the cars will be a completely new concept and completely new design philosophy from the ground up in this continuing move that we really started to get starting in 2009, moving away from topside aero and starting to move toward bottom side and under tray aerodynamic benefit to get these cars around high speed corners. So this is going to be the ultimate evolution of this design philosophy, now really going back to about 2009 in the macrocosmic scheme of things. Ferrari's interpretation thereof, well, there it is in front of you. Are there really too many things to note different from the SF90 of 2019? Well, macrocosmically, not so much. We've got a car that appears to be the overall same dimensions as the SF90, and again, those dimensions are basically homologated in the regulations anyway, for the most part, but we do have a few notable developments. One thing that the SF90 was really good at was high speed. In terms of straight line speed. It was a very low drag car, and Ferrari said at the time that they were going for a low drag concept. Unfortunately, they went a little bit too hard in that low drag direction, and it definitely hurt their chances of being competitive for the balance of 2019. And of course, we saw Mercedes once again take the Drivers' and Constructors' Championship. What, then, do Ferrari do to react to all of that? Well, evidently, what we see here on the SF1000, we have got ourselves basically the same car as the SF90, but we are adding downforce here. And we're adding some downforce in some pretty cool ways. Nothing that appears to be too unconventional or unconventional at all in many respects, but very clearly we can see how they're developing the front end and the midsection of the car here via bargeboards and all sorts of turning vane details to get more downforce from that midsection of the car. And of course, that downforce is so very, very important for high-speed stability and high-speed cornering grip. And of course, that's something that Mercedes has been king at since basically the beginning of this current bend in the Formula One regulation starting in 2017. So we've got some development going on in this car. Much like we saw on the Haas last week, we do have this front wing, this rather radical front wing design that we saw in 2019, starting with the Alfa Romeo, and then Ferrari ran it, of course, as well. You can see that gradual open curving shape and twisting down outboard as it moves outboard to the extreme side of the wing there where the right-hand end fence is from our angle there. This, of course, was a design that debuted on the Alfa Romeo. Ferrari later used it, and Haas even later used it toward the tail end of 2019. Here it is on the launch spec Ferrari, and you can see just what they're doing here. Unlike the 2017 and 2018 wings, and just like the 2019 wings, we don't have any more cascade elements or any fences here in this section just trying to steer the air and create even more significant outwash, but we do have this multi-element main plane. I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 flap elements on either side of that wing there, as you can see. And of course, we still have our neutral center section homologated in the regulations like so. Additionally, just like on all of the other cars, we do have that roughly delta-shaped profile across the front end, and of course, that is on all the cars homologated in the regs. What is interesting, though, is apart from that neutral center section there in the front half of the wing, we have very, very nicely sculpted leading-edge profiles across both sides of the flap. And of course, this is something that is free reign for the designers. Basically, there is no straight line anywhere on this wing except for that homologated center section, and that is definitely really cool to see the development already taking off in the early days of 2020. Of course, the end fences here, really nothing too spectacular to write home about. These were also greatly simplified for the 2019 rules, and we see the consequences thereof. No more multi-element end fences here, just a very slight outward negative curve heading in that overall direction. And again, just trying to create outwash to get the air away from these front wheels to cut down on that turbulence that would then spoil the airflow over the rest of the car as the air passed over it. If you've got perturbations in your flow coming off of the front wing, no other part of the car is going to work well, aerodynamically speaking. What else have we got going on here? If we can zoom in a little bit to the front end, and the resolution on this shot is actually quite nice, so we can get rather close. You can see that we have got all of these little gills in the basically in the keel section of the car. No keels on these cars anymore, of course, but we've seen similar designs to this before. I remember McLaren in 2017 actually did something similar to this with their front wing mounting pylons in this section of the car, but Ferrari choosing to do these serrated winglets coming down from the bottom of the chassis in this section. And of course, this is just to precondition the flow as it would pass inside the car here, inside the axles, and then to interface with the barge boards and then ultimately the floor through this section, as well as splitting upward to feed the radiators in that direction there. So, of course, a multi-element approach going on with those multi-element vanes there underneath the nose. And again, really all conventional here. Another thing on this shot, speaking of the barge boards and turning vanes, have a look at the complexity already that we're seeing from Ferrari. We have got all of these little elements going every which way in this center section of the front end. Just everywhere. We have got little winglets already. And this is a launch spec car, so this by no means is going to be representative of what's actually happening on the car once we get to Barcelona for preseason testing. But I'm just trying to highlight edge profiles for you, just so you can get a sense of how complicated all of this stuff already is on the launch spec. It is just absolutely ridiculous. I mean, and I've not even come close to hitting all of the surfaces yet. There are just little winglets and struts and everything going every which way on that car. Pulling out, you can get a sense of the proportions. Yeah, and that's definitely not everything in the bargeboard area. It's insane. It's an absolutely insane amount of aerodynamic work going on in that bargeboard section, and of course, they are trying to add downforce to this car. Again, the SF90 was a very good low drag concept, and it certainly had some of the highest straight line speeds that we saw in 2019, but straight line speed is not the name of the game in Formula One anymore. So if you can get straight line speed, but you're willing to sacrifice a little bit of it for more downforce, there you go. Downforce is the name of the game, and that is exactly what they're trying to do with the SF90. Moving across to the side pod and floor area, first of all, I want to draw your attention to the radiator inlets here in the side pod. This is a little bit of a departure as far as we're concerned with recent Ferrari design. Remember on the SF70H of 2017, we had very, very small radiator openings in this section, roughly in that size of a box going into the side pods there to feed the engine cooling. We saw the same thing in 2018, and we saw the same thing in 2019. But here for 2020, these openings have gotten a little bit wider, and also notice something that's missing. Gone are the little intake ducts on top of the side pods there, which would have been taking flow from the mirror fairings to feed the radiators that way. Interesting to note that. Also, what's interesting to note about these mirror fairings, have a look at this overall shape. We have got a winglet on top of the mirror fairing, and then we have the actual mirror fairing itself underneath. This is almost identical to what we saw on the Haas. Very, very interesting. Also something that's interesting, and something that's been brought up by none other than one of the best modelers in sim racing, CC of RSS, Race Sim Studio fame. He's brought up an interesting point about the mirrors here. The exclusion boxes that the FIA draws in their technical regulations, according to his interpretation of this, and remember, this is a guy who is not at all a race car designer, but he has designed some of the highest quality open-wheel Formula 1 type mods in sim racing. He says that these mirrors are illegal. They're a little bit too far outboard, according to his interpretation of the rule book. I've yet to see anybody raise this issue talking about reality here in terms of the actual designs of the whole two cars that we've seen so far, but these mirrors may or may not be legal according to how conservatively you want to interpret the regulations here. So do watch that. That could well be a storyline that comes up. Just a little bit of speculation though. Moving down to the side pod, we can see that Ferrari have managed to package everything very, very thinly and sveltely and conservatively in terms of using floor space. Everything is absolutely crisp, clear, and clean. We have got all of this very cohesively packaged here with the overall shape of the side pod, and that of course is going to leave all kinds of space to play with. There's our meme calling back from 2017, just highlighting here in this red section. Yep, all of this is free floor space to do what with, you say? Well, to ram air along the flanks of the car for two purposes. One, all of your underbody aero, and of course there's going to be more stuff going on toward the center section on the underside of the car, right through here, just trying to seal everything so that you can blow air along the flanks of the car, along the reference plane, to seal the floor, to stop air spilling out, and you lose underbody aero efficiency that way. So you create sort of a crude ground effect doing there. But at the other side, you can actually get some air entrained along the side pod there, and that is going to send air towards your diffuser, and of course, ultimately, the more air you blow into the diffuser, the more air you blow out of the diffuser at untold velocity, and you get yourself some incredible downforce at the rear of the car, which of course is really where it matters. Speaking of the rear of the car, much like we saw on the Haas, we also have this little T-wing on the back of the engine cover of the Ferrari, and of course there would be a mirror image of this on the other side, so it's going to be bilaterally symmetrical, more or less. But also going on here, we have got some trick designs happening with these swan neck pylons to support the rear wing main plane itself. We have got this actually quite beautiful looking armature to actuate the DRS flap. You can see that there. This almost has a swan neck profile in its own right. That looks very, very cool. I do like that shape. Just aesthetically, it looks cool. Hopefully it's effective. And as well, I want to draw your attention to the rear wing end fences here. We have seen striations, gills like these, cut into the end fences on many cars, really since the advent of the 2017 rulebook that we are still more or less dealing with now. But have a look in this area here. Now, the angle of this is compressing the visual profile that is presented to us here. But this whole section of the wing that I'm going to highlight in green, from here all the way to here, is empty space. So this section here is an overhang that goes over top of this section of the wing through here. So the whole structural support of not only the wing's own weight, but all of the downforce, and at maximum downforce at max speed, this wing could be generating well over 2,000 pounds of downforce here, probably more than that even. All that weight's going to be transferred through right here at about this point each side. So those two contact points to transmit all of that downforce into the chassis, just going through that point right there. I don't know how strong a Formula One rear wing is, but it has got to be quite an impressive bit of kit if they're able to transmit all those forces through such a narrow physical area of carbon work. That is pretty remarkable. On this next shot here of the SF1000, we've got ourselves a straight-on and level view from the nose looking rearward, and you can see just that full shape of that front wing there, just gradually curving outward, as again we saw on the Alfa Romeo in 2019, and on the Ferrari, and now on the Ferrari and on the Haas of 2020. And again, we thought that this overall wing profile would be something that we would see this year, and obviously so far that prediction is coming good. On the nose section of the car, we can see that Ferrari are still doing this thumbnail nose with these two little nostrils along the side. This looks very similar to what we saw on the Haas last week, and again, I am expecting other teams to go more or less with a design similar to this as well. We do have a little bit of revision, though, on the nose, and we are going to start to lose some resolution here as we get closer, but you can see just this little opening at the front of the nose. That is most likely for driver cooling. Again, just get a little bit of airflow up through this section of the car to cool the cockpit a little bit, because it can get mighty hot inside one of these cars, despite it being an open cockpit. Additionally to that, these two little nostrils allow airflow to come up from the sides of the nose tip to feed an S-duct, which of course has to be inside this nose because we have a little bit of an indentation here, a little bit of a raised area in the bodywork, which of course must be an exhaust for an S-duct moving up there. Of course, they're just trying to get some air above the halo there. The halo, of course, because of the roughly cylindrical profile of that edge-on, it is going to induce some pretty significant turbulence around that section. And, of course, right in this section of the car, we have got our air intake snorkel for the engine. So you want as smooth a flow as possible coming into that snorkel, so that is partially why the S-duct is going to be venting where it does. Of course, the other reason is you're going to create a negative pressure in this section, so you're going to get some downforce happening in this area. And of course, front end grip is also very important on one of these cars. So in addition to the front wing doing a lot of that work, you're also going to get some more passive effects of that air coming off. Every action has an equal and opposite reaction, of course. Moving in a little bit closer, you can see just the complexity of those initial bargeboards here. These are not the vanes that are coming down from the bottom of the chassis, roughly like this from that edge-on profile. These are parts of the, I suppose you could call them the primary bargeboards, a little extension thereof, basically to encompass this whole section of the car there along the flanks of the front end. It is unbelievably complex. How many elements are there? Like 6, 7, 8, something like that. Of course, they are going to be symmetrical laterally. Yeah, that's something. That's really, really something. Beyond that, what else can we see? Some more pedestrian things on this shot. We've got our brake duct, big brake duct entrance there with at least 3 individual strakes through there. Could be more, could be less. We'll find out as we see this area develop. And of course, on a 2020 Formula One car now, for the second time, we have wishbone, and pushrod. Double wishbone pushrod suspension here on the front end of the SF1000. And of course, we're continuing the 100% rate of double wishbone pushrod front ends on Formula One cars. And this going back now to 2017 here with this rules package. Taking a look toward the rear of this shot, we can see these big vanes. These are parts of the turning vanes in the side pods there. And of course, they appear to link up to these vanes up here, which appear to link up to the mirror fairings here and the mirror stalks, which go back to the cockpit. So all of that basically functioning as one cohesive aerodynamic unit. Again, just trying to steer air around so that it doesn't interplay with the halo here and create undue turbulence, but also so that air can be entrained to run down the back of the side pod toward the rear zone and then ultimately feed the rear wing of the car and get ourselves a lot of downforce that way. So very cool. Additionally, on this shot, going back toward the air snorkel again, we can see Ferrari running a triangular snorkel just as they did in 2018, 2019, and the Haas doing in 2020 as well. And here we can see these. Those of you who are a little bit older in the audience, you're going to know exactly what we would call these. These, I am very pleased to say, are Viking horns. Yes, remember, the Holy of Holies, the McLaren MP420 of 2005. One of the most striking features of that car were its Viking horns along the air snorkel there, right in this area. Ferrari are bringing them back. Welcome back, Viking horns. Absolutely love it. Of course, the rationale of that is to try and condition flow, not so much to steer the flow around, but just to sort of spoil it a little bit so that it calms down and then more or less returns to as laminar a flow as possible before it gets to the rear wing, because, of course, if you have turbulence going onto your rear wing, it's not going to be a very pretty sight. So, of course, the more calm and level flow you can get, of course, to that rear wing, the more effective it's going to be, quite obviously. In shot as well, we can see the radiator inlets on the SF1000. There it is. Very cool. You can see that they are trying to manage the airflow inside. We have slats in here, 1, 2, and 3, caused by the actual lip of the side pod itself. There's another little duct in this section here, a little slot gap almost. And who knows what untold wonders they're going to be doing with that flow in there. Obviously, they are trying to route air into the engine bay for cooling the engine. There also may be a little bit of auxiliary engine intake coming through the side pod. Not entirely sure how they're going to be routing all of that. Of course, most of the engine intake, we're led to believe, is going to be happening through the snorkel here. But you can see that we have this little subdivision inside the snorkel. So I would say that this highest section is going to be for turbocharger intake. And then we also appear to have an open section that comes down at least to midline here. It may be open down here as well. So we'll have to see what they're doing. We have seen teams do things like this in the past in terms of trying to either get more engine cooling, engine intake, or perhaps to do even different things with the airflow that they don't want us to know about. But there are potentially 3 subdivisions, 3 rather large plenums inside that snorkel, so that's definitely going to be something to keep an eye on as we go into winter testing. Anything else on this shot that strikes me? Not particularly at this time. That just about covers everything that we have to see here. On to the next one. And for this next shot, we have got a side-on profile view of the SF1000. The first thing that strikes the eye here, rake. Yes, ride height in the front, ride height from the reference plane at the rear. And you can see just how much smaller this first line is from this second one, height-wise. That is indicative of a ride height difference from front to rear, which, of course, we call rake. Why do we run rake? Well, we want stability, first of all, in weight transfer and weight distribution. So you want to get most of your weight running forward here, because remember, all of your heavy components in a Formula 1 car are going to be from here rearward. So most of your weight bias just naturally is going to be back in this direction here toward the rear. You want that weight to come back forward so that you can get closer to that 50-50 weight distribution, ideally right underneath the driver there, so he has optimal control front to rear. Of course, it's not really possible to do this, but you try to fool physics a little bit and tilt the car forward to get some of that weight going farther forward once again. Additionally to that, and probably more important these days, rake is run for aerodynamic benefits. You notice the car is very low in the front section here. What also happens in the front section? Well, the air is going to be ramming itself through the car from this direction rearward. So, as the air comes in, it's going to start to pile up in this section. Some of it, of course, is going to pass through the barge boards and then over the reference plane to feed the diffuser there through all that floor space in this section. However, some of it is going to pass underneath the car. You have a pinch point here of high pressure. The air starts to spill underneath at very high speed, and then it expands into the larger gap that is left as the ride height pitches up here toward the rear. And of course, that allows for more volume of air to come through. The air expands, slows down a little bit, leaves a partial vacuum underneath the car, and then of course, as it's accelerated out of the diffuser, you're going to create a lot of negative pressure, which results in an equal and opposite reaction in the, of course, opposite direction, which is down relative to the reference plane, which means downforce. So lots of rake on the Ferrari, lots of rake on the Haas, and I have every suspicion to believe that we're going to be seeing a lot of rake break on all of the 2020 Formula One cars that we have yet to see, which of course is still 8 out of the 10. Regardless of that, anything else that's readily apparent on this shot? Well, not so much, although we do have an interesting development going on here. Look at the shape of the engine cover proper. And then we have all of this space up here, which is dominated by the shark fin. This is also extremely similar to both the SF90 of 2019 as well as the VF20 from Haas. We talked about Haas maybe playing some graphical trickery up in this section here. Ferrari not doing anything like that. Ferrari just letting everybody see the full extent of that shark fin, which of course is quite large, as you can see. And also interesting to note that they have got this big bump in the engine cover there as the shark fin starts to come in. Of course, this is to accommodate the regulations, allowing bodywork to be in this section here, but not in this section here, so they have to abide by that. But also, in conjunction with the little Viking horns in this area that we talked about on the previous shot, you can just see how the air could just pass straight to the main plane of that rear wing there. So, of course, going to be playing some dividends there for rear downforce from the top side. In addition to all that, here is a better look at the structure of that rear wing. Now, of course, it's flattened out because of the angle, but all of this would be pitched rather aggressively inboard, as you can see there. And then, of course, all of the forces being transmitted just by this section of the wing. And all of this rearward here is all open. So again, they are doing some amazing things with their carbon work here, and it's incredible. It's incredible to see what they're able to do with carbon composites nowadays. Barely would have been imaginable 10 years ago. That is the nature of technology and development in Formula One. Moving in closer, we lose some resolution here, but just look at all of the complexity going on with the barge boards here. I'm just trying to highlight leading edge profiles. There are so many of them, I can hardly believe it, but it is complicated, it is refined, it is all there, and it's ridiculous. The amount of work that they're able to do in this section of the car nowadays. Again, all of this work would be barely imaginable 10 years ago, but just look at everything that's going on in this section of the car. It is unbelievably sophisticated, unbelievably complex, and of course, they're pursuing downforce with this. So again, they had a decent concept for 2019 with the SF90. They're adding downforce to it, so hopefully that is going to be playing dividends for them in 2020. We shall see. And here on this next shot, this is actually a screenshot that I grabbed during the launch event here on my phone, so not such great resolution, unfortunately, but obviously a shot of the front wing. There's our homologated leading edge profile, and then we get into the outboard flap elements, and you can just see the very nice curving shapes that Ferrari have put into that wing. Looks very, very cool. Also, just want to draw your attention to the flap angle adjusters. Obviously, we have got one of those here. There's another one just barely visible here, and they, of course, are going to be changing the angle of attack of these flap elements, and they'd be able to adjust that in the pit stop. However, you notice the shape on this. It does have a very distinct airfoil shape across both profiles, where it would be turned there by either the mechanic's hand or with an electric tool implement, as well as the little stalk that actually comprises the body of that adjuster. So they're even trying to steer the air with the flap adjusters. Really cool. Also on this shot, you can see these little stays that are between some of the wing elements, just trying to add a little bit of rigidity. Of course, this wing, even though it looks amazingly fragile with all of these very small spindly elements in it, it's immensely strong. It's under a lot of aerodynamic pressure, and I mean, if you could manage to get on it without crushing anything, you would stand on this wing and it would support your weight easily. So it's pretty cool to look at how fragile a lot of these components appear to be, but in actuality, when you start to comprehend the forces that they're experiencing time and time again cyclically as the car accelerates and decelerates, you start to understand that this work, it looks very ornate, but it's amazingly robust construction. Really, really cool. Not too much else to see on this shot other than the exit up here for the S-duct. right there. As we talked about before, this confirms that we do have this little bulge out of the bodywork, just again trying to exhaust some air from the nose, as it would be passing underneath the nose through the nostrils there. There'd be an entrance duct someplace in this section on the bottom side, and then of course it would accelerate through the nose and then out that little slot gap on top. Very cool. Now in this next shot here, I just wanted to highlight once again the structure of that rear wing end fence. Just look, this section here is what's doing all of your load bearing, and then this section rearward is all open, and you can see the little striations coming down from the meaty structure of the end fence here, and they continue forward for quite a ways. There are multiple elements in that section of the wing. Very cool. We can also see what Ferrari have done with their exhaust treatment here. Have a look. There is our main engine exhaust coming out from the exhaust side of the turbocharger, and then our turbocharger wastegate right here, so our two pipes go in that way. Very cool. Here's the back side of our T-wing at the back of the engine cover, and then of course one of the two swan neck supports, the pylons there, for the rear wing, also carrying the hydraulic lines for the DRS actuation. Not too much else here on this shot, and they intentionally kept the cameras up a bit so we couldn't see too much of the underside of the rear zone of the car. Of course, that would be a very, very secretive part of the car. They don't quite want to divulge all the secrets yet, but there it is. Very cool. And of course, you can see the slot gap here in the rear wing as well. Just, again, that would open up when the DRS is activated as well. Cool. And lastly, for our final shot here, we of course have the three probably most important single members of the Ferrari team for 2020. In the center, we have got team principal Mattia Binotto. Here we have got lead driver Sebastian Vettel, and here we have got second driver and a rising superstar Charles Leclerc. So these three guys have Ferrari's destiny in their hands once again for 2020. Their car, very much an evolution of the SF90 from 2019, but as we have discussed, they are going for more downforce indeed on this car. Also, just to confirm for anybody who is still wondering, double wishbone pull rod rear suspension there. But definitely, we've got ourselves an evolutionary rather than a revolutionary car. This was something that I think we were all expecting to see, and it is what Ferrari have done. Is it going to be enough to play dividends in 2020? Well, so far, this has to be the most sophisticated car that we have seen this year. However, we have only seen two cars to date, the Haas and now the Ferrari. So we have one midfield, somewhat backmarker team, and we have one of the teams that have been winning races consistently. So perhaps we don't have quite an accurate barometer yet to see where Ferrari may actually stack up relative to everybody else, but there it is, the Ferrari SF1000, and three of the people who are going to be very much responsible for using it to its greatest effect. There we go. We shall see what the other teams do. Obviously, this is now the benchmark for the 2020 cars in terms of design. What have Red Bull done? What have Mercedes done? And really, what have McLaren done? Very much a lot of intrigue remains for these 2020 car launches, and of course, we still have another 8 teams to reveal their machines. So we've got a lot to see still, and of course we're going to be finding out pretty much all together as we go through this saga that will be yet another season of the Formula One World Championship. I do hope you all enjoyed this one, and I do thank you all very much for watching. Ferrari Man 601 saying thanks, and of course, we will see you soon.